Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Nice to see you, sir.
Thank you very much. So, now, was everyone here last week? Do we need to go over any ground? Are there any questions that we want to cover before we start with today's sessions?
I think the video that you shared already on YouTube had quite explained itself, and I think it's more important to look for today's session, and we are so excited to start that. So I advise to go ahead with today's session. It was lovely and very interesting, historical as well. A very great introduction first session we had. And I really thank you on behalf of everyone. Thank you, Hisham, for all this great work, and God bless you all.
You're welcome, Sam. You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. So last week we went into the origins of Agile, and we spoke about how the values and principles of what Agile is. And in today's session, I want to go into in some detail, and it's going to be quite technical today, about when we would employ Agile or when we wouldn't. Because one of the misconceptions out there is that Agile is a total replacement for waterfall. And that's not true. In most organizations, there will be some projects that will be suitable to Agile and some projects that are more suitable to waterfall. And what I'd like to do today is to help walk you through how to determine what type of project is more suitable to Agile or more suitable to waterfall, or might actually have a hybrid approach, and why. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce you to a matrix called the Stacy Matrix. And it's a very simple matrix where we can look at where our project falls and make a decision about where to put our project based on that one. I'm also going to introduce you to, or show you, the Cynefin framework, which is a bit more advanced, and it looks at the challenge from a slightly different frame, similar but slightly different. We're going to look at some statistics to see what data says about Agile versus waterfall projects from some studies of 10,000 different projects. And then we're going to use a very old radar to look at, is your team and your organization and the project suitable for Agile or not? And so the purpose of all of these frameworks and tools is for us to make a decision, if we're looking at a project, which way to go. Okay, so what I want to do is, when we go to the Agile Alliance, which is the peak body for Agile, the very first two sentences on their webpage are these. And it says that Agile is the ability to create and respond to change. It is a way of dealing with and ultimately succeeding in an uncertain and turbulent environment. And really, this is the most important part about Agile. If the environment is stable and if our projects have got certainty, Agile is not necessarily the most suitable method to use. So we use Agile when there's high levels of uncertainty and turbulence in the environment. So let's have a look at what that really means. So the first sort of tool that I want to introduce you to, if you haven't seen this before, is called the Stacy Matrix. Now, this is an adaptation of Ralph Stacey's matrix. Ralph Stacey was a management theorist and a mathematician. And he really stated that most planning and management activities that organizations do are meaningless in an unpredictable world. And to try to explain what he meant, he created this matrix. Now, this particular form of it has been adapted for software or for IT systems. So it's not quite what he originally published. It's some of the words have changed a bit. But what he says is there's two dimensions to a project. And the first dimension on the bottom is the technical uncertainty. And so when we're dealing with hardware and software in terms of putting together a solution, are we certain about it? So, you know, is the technology that we're using, is it well known? Do we know how to deploy it? Are we expert at it? Or is it uncertain? So most people here are in, you know, ERP, so you may be PeopleSoft or SAP or whatever ERP tool you use, and I imagine you have great confidence with that tool and you know what it can do. But if I was to, you know, if we were to start to implement some of the new machine learning type of tools, then you may be a bit more uncertain about that. And so if there was some advanced technologies and things that you were trying to integrate, then that would push us into the uncertain part of the matrix. Now, the other dimension is the requirements uncertainty. And this is where probably most uncertainty comes from in IT projects. So this is, you know, do we really understand, or do our users really understand the requirements, what they want to do? Do we understand the business processes very well? And if there's a large amount of agreement, then that's great. You know, if the business owners and the product owners are very agreeable about what they want, and you understand that as developers, then you have a high level of agreement. But if some of the business owners are arguing about what features are most important, or they're uncertain about what the underlying processes are that you're trying to automate, or if your developers don't really understand what they're trying to say, if there's ambiguity in the requirements, then we have disagreement. Now, what Stacy says is that, you know, down the bottom left-hand side, if you're very certain about the conditions, about the technology, and you have a large amount of agreement, it's a fairly simple project. And for that, you know, waterfall is very good because it's linear, it's predictable, we can just roll it out, we can just get on with it. It's a no-brainer. Now, where there's a high level of uncertainty, you know, putting machine learning, for example, into the organization, and a lot of the business product owners and the business owners don't really agree with what they're trying to achieve, then it may be very chaotic. And no matter what you do, you're not going to please anyone. And so what you want to do is you want to avoid that. If there's high uncertainty with the technology and there's high disagreement about the business requirements, then you really don't want to start that project at all. You need to do whatever you can to get more agreement around the requirements, or learn more about the technology, or both. And so his words that he used was that if it's highly certain and highly agreeable, then it's simple. If one of the dimensions is uncertain and one of them isn't, then it's complicated. But most of that area is complex. So you've got reasonably high uncertainty and reasonably high disagreement, and then that's a complex problem. And if we think about it, really that's the area that most IT lives in. So even though we might know SAP quite well, you know, if we're in a 3-year project, we don't know what features they're going to be bringing out in 3 years' time. And in 3 years' time, the business requirements might change a lot. And so that drives a complexity even into what should be a straightforward project. And for that complex area is much more suited to Agile. And so that's where it kind of plays. Now, the Stacy Matrix, it was simple, and it limited your classification to requirements and technology. But if you think about it, there's a lot more going on in an organization than just the technical uncertainty and the requirements uncertainty. There might be budgetary uncertainty, there might be competing forces, there might be market forces which are changing. There's all sorts of different dimensions. And so that matrix is a very simple matrix, but it might not capture the entire complexity and all of it. And so a more sophisticated tool is called the Cynefin framework. And the Cynefin framework was invented by an IBMer and an academic called David Snowden. And it's a Welsh word, Cynefin, and it means a place, like it's a place where people have multiple belongings. So it's like a collection point. Now, this is fairly, fairly complicated, so it's going to take me, a bit of time to go through this one slowly, but I'll try to be as clear as I can. But please feel free to ask me questions as we go. And Hisham, if you see, I can't see the chat group because it's taking up my screen. If there's any chat questions that come up, please just interrupt me. And one of the first questions I would ask is, have people seen this and used it? Because if everyone on the group has already seen it and used it, then we can have a very short meeting. So have people seen and used this or not? And I can't see the screen, so Hisham, you have to tell me.
Yes, John, I can see.
Yep. Are people on the chat, are people saying they have used it or they haven't seen this before?
Almost no.
Okay, great. Okay, I'll go very slowly then.
Yes, even me. Okay.
Okay, that's okay.
Good.
All right. So this will take us about half an hour to go through, maybe longer. Now, this is a tool that we would use when we're in large organizations and when you've got lots of teams and we're trying to decide really what to do, how to approach a problem. Now, we use it in IT, but we also use it in strategy as well, and marketing and all sorts of things. So what it does is it separates systems into ordered and unordered systems. And so a system is obviously, when we're talking about IT, it's a combination of the network and the hardware and the software and the people and the policies and the budgets and all of those things make up the system. And so what this framework does is it says that there's fundamentally two different types of systems. There's an ordered system and there's an unordered system. And now, so an ordered system means that it's predictable, that its parts are put together. Now, those ordered systems are broken down into two parts. We've got the clear domain, which is the bottom right, and the complicated domain. So we can have very clear or obvious or simple ordered systems. All of those words at the moment, this framework keeps changing every few years. Sometimes it's called simple, sometimes it's called obvious. At the moment, they're calling it clear. So we've got, and it's a very highly ordered system. And then we've got complicated, which are much more, got many more parts, but they're still ordered. And I'm going to explain these in a minute. And then we have unordered systems, which are on the left-hand side, which are complex, and chaotic. And these are mathematical principles or concepts, and I'm going to explain them now in some detail. So starting on the bottom right-hand corner in the clear domain, what that's really saying here is that it's a very simple problem, a very obvious problem. And we can understand this through the idea of causality. So what we should be able to do is, if we do something with a system that belongs in that domain, we should know exactly what that system would do. So for example, just an IT example, so if we know that our users are running out of storage because they keep saving their files, it's a pretty simple problem. There's two things that we can do. We can either buy more storage, or we can start to archive their files offline, off the system. And so it's a fairly obvious problem. It's not difficult to understand. Now, what that little cloudy thing does in the middle is that when we have a clear problem, it tells us what we need to do. So what it says there is, it says sense, categorize, and respond. So we sense that we're running out of storage. We look at our storage systems monitors, and we see that, you know, we're going to run out of storage capacity in a few months. We categorize it as a storage problem, and we respond to it with a solution. So buy more storage or offline archive. Now, the other thing there is got constraints. So clear systems or simple systems have got fixed constraints. So in our example, the fixed constraint is the hard disk capacity. It is fixed. It's got a physical fixed constraint. And when we run out of hard disk capacity, our system is full and we can't do anything to it. So that's what we mean by fixed constraints. In other systems, so for example, in water systems, a dam wall would be a fixed constraint. So if we want to block a river, we would put a constraint in it, and that would stop that system, the water flowing, and it would be very fixed. So when we have a clear problem, when there's a clear line between cause and effect, we can use best practices. So to go back to my example, if we're running low on storage, the best practice says that we're going to put more storage on. It really doesn't take a lot of thought, a lot of thinking. And so it's highly constrained. It's obvious. The cause is known, users saving files. The effect is known. If we put more storage, we're going to have more capacity. And so it's the simplest of our problems. That can be conducted very simply through a linear process. We don't need any teams. We just need to write a purchase order, or we need to write a small project plan to get some more offline archival happening. So the next one, we're going up into the complicated domain. Please, if there's any questions, if you don't understand my language, you know, please tell me, and I'll try to find different ways to say it. And, you know, I apologize. These are technical. Some of these are technical words. I can't do anything about that, but we'll do our best here. So when we go up into the complicated domain, we're now looking at a cause and effect, like a system which is made up of many parts, many moving parts.
Please forgive me. Please.
Yes.
If you assign, I am in the right up corner, down up corner, you may get our focusing on the area you're talking about. Our culture is not enough to catch your words about these things. Assign by area, upside, left corner, right corner, like that. And forgive me for this interference.
Sorry, I could you just repeat the question again just once? I couldn't quite understand you.
Could I say it بالعربي? Could I say it Arabic and Hisham translate it for you if Hisham is there?
Hisham,
Yes, John.
did you translate those into Arabic?
Some people, his question is ask about the left-hand side. Okay, if he needs some clarification for these two area in the corner, left and up, and the bottom. Okay.
Yep.
And some people ask to use the mouse pointer in your illustration to make them more concentrate. Okay.
Oh, I can't. My Macintosh is not allowing me to do the mouse pointer. Okay, so right now I've just finished with the bottom right where it says clear.
Okay.
And now I'm going to the top right where it says complicated and good practice.
Okay, let me ask him. Mr. Abdelkarim, do you still have any question in this part?
أنا بس ما استطعت أتابع معه لأنه ماني قادر أمسك الأريا اللي هو قاعد يتكلم فيها بس يقول لي أنا أبغى أب سايت رايت سايت زي كذا.
Okay, okay. أهلا وسهلا بك. حاضر. أبشر. John, please,
Yes.
he asked, we are in which area for these 4 parts? Yeah, before we go in the illustration or explanation, tell us which area you are talking about it.
So,
okay.
So the first one I did was bottom right. Now I'm going to talk about complicated, which is the top right.
Top right. Okay. Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about that one next. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So in the top right is the complicated domain. So this is it is still an ordered system, but it has got lots of moving parts. So, for example, if we wanted to deploy single sign-on across the organization. So at the moment, our users are going to be signing on to several different systems, and they have to log in to this system with a different password and another system with a different password. And so one of our projects might be to create a single sign-on to all of the systems. So that's quite complicated. There's quite a lot of work involved. We might need some middleware. We might need to do some development on some legacy systems. But we know that we can implement a single sign-on, and we know that once the project is finished, it should work without too much problem. You know, we might have some teething problems, but we can use some experts, we can use some expertise and some good practices, and we can make this happen with quite a high degree of confidence. And we know that we can roll that project out, and we just have to say, well, you know, if with system A, this is how you create a single sign-on, or system B, this is how we do it, and system C. And although it's much more complicated than adding storage, it is not, the result is predictable. We can predict that it might take us 12 months to be able to go through the different systems and have them all working. We might need some experts to do it, but we know that at the end of that project, everyone will be able to sign on. And so what's happening there is that we're sensing the problem, and the problem in this case is that users are having to log on to multiple different systems. And we can do an audit of our systems to make sure that they all support some form of single sign-on. And when we do, we can then implement a project. And this type of project is also very good for waterfall. It's fairly straightforward. And there might be several different ways that we can create single sign-on. There's a few different technologies, there's a few different middleware solutions. So we're not using the best practice, but we are going to use a good practice. We sort of know what's going on. So another example of a complicated system would be an aeroplane. So if we want to build an aeroplane, it's very complicated. It's got jets and wings and fuel systems and electrical systems. But we know that if we obey the laws of physics and we use the knowledge in the industry, we can design and create an aeroplane and we can launch it. So an aeroplane is an ordered system. Creating a project where we're putting single sign-on, I say 3 or 4 different systems, it's still ordered. And therefore, it's still probably suitable for waterfall. Now, there's a thing called constraints, and these constraints are called, in this particular domain, are called governing constraints. And the best way that I can explain a governing constraint to you is to think of it as a scope of work. So we're saying our job is to put single sign-on on, and it's going to take this many hours and this many dollars, and that's a constraint that we have to work towards. And working within that constraint of work scope, we can achieve a solution. And that's the complicated domain. And it's similar, to the last one, the complex. There's similar ones. You can see the complicated there and the simple. And now we're going to go to the complex. So now we're going to go over onto the top left-hand quadrant, the top left-hand domain. Now, this is an unordered system. So an example of an unordered system in nature is like a rainforest. It's organic. We don't know how many trees there will be next year or where they will be. It's very organic. We don't know how it's going to go. In terms of IT systems, things get complex mostly when we don't understand the technologies fully and we don't understand the requirements, especially the requirements. And this happens a lot when the business requirements are changing. So the business owners are saying to you as developers, they're saying, we want more business analytics, we want more artificial intelligence, and we want more customer-facing systems. And as developers, we have to try to understand what it is that they're trying to achieve. And sometimes that's not very clear. Often it's not very clear. And a very typical example of a complex problem would be through a merger and acquisition. So if we're getting two different companies with two different ERP systems and all the difference, and we have to, as IT, we have to merge them together. Now there's a lot of unknowns in there. And so this is where Agile practices are much better. So what this model says is that when we are dealing with complex systems or complex problems, what we want to do is to probe, sense, and respond. I want to go into that a little bit in some detail. So let's say, for example, that we have your company has bought another company, and as developers, you have to merge your systems with their systems. And at the same time, a lot of the business people have left, and so some of the institutional knowledge is no longer there. So as developers, the first thing you want to do is to probe. You want to, and what probe means is a bit like question. So you want to start to question the business. So you want to say, what is it that you want to achieve? What are the most important things to do? Do you still want this feature? How do you see this working? So in an IT sense, that probing is a lot of questioning of the business users and the end users to see what they want, to try to get some sort of clarity. And then you make some sort of sense of that. So when you feel that you understand their requirements enough or the new technologies enough, then you make a response. And what we don't have now is because we can't fall on best practices, and we can't even fall on good practices because everything's unknown. We don't know what we're really planning for. And so what we do is we call on what's called Exactive Practices. And I apologize for this. This is a complicated word. What it comes from is, it comes from evolutionary biology. And it's like adaptation, but it's a form of adaptation. And what it means is that it's taking things, it's taking ideas or solutions for one problem and applying them to another problem. So I'll give you the best example I can in nature. So we all know that birds use feathers to fly. But feathers appeared a long time before there were birds. Feathers appeared on dinosaurs, and they were designed to modulate the heat of the dinosaur. They were like thermostats. And then we can assume that the dinosaurs would start to hop from tree to tree, and the ones with the better wings or the better feathers on their limbs then adapted those feathers for flight. But the feathers weren't, they were, the original purpose of a feather was to modulate temperature, but then they were used by birds for flight. And so applying this idea in software development is the idea of taking components of code that we've used somewhere else and using them for a solution that we're trying to build. Another way to describe this was emergent practices. So we would create these new solutions in time, over a period of time. So what's a good example here? So Twitter, it was originally not on the web. It was originally used between phones. It was for texting, and it was designed to let people know where there were good parties. And then it started to become a very good communication tool in text. And then as the web was coming along, they said, let's port this, let's adapt this to the web. Let's take this idea that we built for text and put them on the web, and that created Twitter. And so what that was doing was using technology or using ideas and codes or workflows to do one thing to achieve something completely different. And so this is where Agile really fits. It fits in this domain. It fits when we are trying to evolve our software and our systems towards unknown future requirements. And in terms of the constraints here, we have things called enabling constraints. So one of the enabling constraints, so an enabling constraint is a very difficult concept to understand, but what it means is that it's like a set of rules which allow more complex systems to form. So, for example, one of the enabling constraints in Agile is to do very small iterative pieces of work rather than large pieces of work, but we constrain it. We say, what can we do in a sprint, in 1 week or 2 weeks? What can we do? And then show it to our user and then get feedback. And so the constraint of trying to ship an increment of work or a component of work in a short period of time enables us to learn, to keep probing our users so that we understand what it is they're trying to achieve. And so that if our problem, if the technology problem that we're trying to solve has got moving requirements, has got unknown things about the technology, unknown things about the business processes that we're trying to do. When there's lots of unknowns, we want to use agile processes in order to kind of probe and sense as we are going, So that's the most important quadrant. And what we're really trying to do is we're really trying to take complex problems and move them into the complicated domain. What we're trying to do is we're trying to run experiments and prototypes in order to move our problem from the top left quadrant into the top right quadrant. So it's a matter of trying to reduce the amount of uncertainty in our problems. Now, the last domain, the bottom left domain, is called the chaotic domain. And this is a highly disordered system. Now, this is the type of, the nature of the system would be when you have some sort of a catastrophic failure. So maybe one of your key suppliers goes out of business. Maybe your systems have been hacked. Maybe there's a very, very nasty core system, kernel bug, and everyone's down. And what you need to do now is you just need to act. So your chaos, this is, some sort of disaster is going on, and you need to somehow stabilize the system. So if you think you've got hacked, you lock everyone out of the system and you roll back to yesterday's version of the software. Or if one of your suppliers goes out of business, then you choose the next best supplier and you get them to come in. So with chaos, you need to act very, very quickly. Otherwise, things just will liquefy and go really out of control. And so there's no effective constraints. And the very last domain is in the middle. And that's the confused state. And that's the state that when you don't know what state you're in. And usually when we come across a new project, we start from the confused state and we ask ourselves questions. We say, is this a complex problem or a complicated problem or a clear problem? And we keep asking questions until we know what type of problem that we have. And then depending upon what domain it falls, the model tells us how to act. And so for that, it's called a sense-making model. Now, how did that go? This is pretty complicated. It takes, I would normally do this in about, half a day to 1 day, and it's difficult enough in English. So I do apologize for the words. They're not mine, they're Dave Snowden's. But are there questions arising from that, or is it really relatively clear?
Let me ask a little bit, what's the difference between complex and complicated as culturing issue?
As a what issue?
Culture issue.
Character issue.
Culture, ثقافة.
A culture issue.
Culture, John, culture.
Yeah, culture. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we have to ask ourselves there. We have to ask ourselves about so it's about cause and effect. So if it's complicated, if in a complicated culture, we'd be able to do something to the culture, and we would expect something to happen. Now we might need some social scientists to help us to predict that. But so, for example, think about some sort of a cultural intervention that you might do. And can you anticipate what would happen? So, for example, if you reduced everyone's pay by 30%, do you know what would happen? Would people complain and stay, or would they leave? Now, if you can predict what can happen, then I would suggest that you have a complicated culture. If you don't know what's going to happen, then you would have a complex culture. So with complex systems, you can't anticipate what's going to happen in the future, except for the very, very near term. And I would suggest that most cultures are complex.
Okay, I got the main idea. What about if I am analyze perfect and work on risk management issues? Is it still complex?
So risk management is a question that you're asking yourself, and the answer of those risk management questions would determine what domain you're in. So, for example, well, actually, give me an example of risk. So let's go big here. Let's go oil price. So the business, we're worried about oil price. Now the oil price is going to affect the Saudi economy, and that's going to potentially affect your business. So can you anticipate what the oil price will be in 12 months' time or 2 years' time? If you can with a great deal of confidence and it's tracking, then that is a complicated problem. But if you really don't know, and if the oil price is fluctuating all over the place, then it is complex. And in terms of risk management, when you're in the complex domain, you have to develop lots and lots of contingencies. So you don't know what's going to happen to the oil price. So you'll say, what is our contingency if it is $1 a barrel? What is our contingency if it's $10 a barrel? And what is our contingency if it's $20 a barrel? And then you wait to see which way it's going to go, and you activate that contingency. In the complicated domain, you would be building a sophisticated mathematical model to be able to predict with a good deal of certainty what the oil price is going to be. And so your risk mitigation is really about the modeling and then using that modeling as a predictor. You could then alter the business strategy depending upon what your model is telling you. But that would presume that the model knows what the oil price is going to do. Does that help you?
Okay, thank you. I just trying to get the idea you are talking about, Cynefin framework. By your explaining, I got that complex and complicated are two domains, but they are differ on the depth of each of one of them. This is my good expecting.
Yeah, so a complex is very turbulent, is very unknown. A complicated, you can predict the future, but it's difficult. In the clear domain, it's very easy to predict the future. And in the chaotic domain, it's impossible to predict the future. You can't do it.
See. Clear and possible and hard and impossible. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Just as I can understand from John, what is in right is ordered and predictable. What is in left, both of the complex and the chaotic, both of them are unordered and unpredictable. Is it correct, John?
Yes. So both of them are unordered. Chaotic is highly unordered, whereas complex, you can. It's called a dispositional disorder. It means that it in a complex domain is kind of moving somewhere. It is moving, and you can kind of understand which directions it's moving, but it's not going to be exact. So, for example, in my oil price modeling, you know that it's probably going to go down, but you don't know how much it's going to go down by.
Yes, got the point. Yes.
In chaotic, there's something, there's a meteor is hit, is hit the earth and everything's. I mean, chaotic to a certain extent. When COVID first broke, right? When COVID came out 8 months ago, it was chaotic. Governments didn't know what to do. Some governments were shutting down, other governments were doing business as normal, just didn't know what to do. And that sense of chaos, you know, it's still carrying on a little bit today. But now there's talk of vaccines, and we also have got quite good therapeutics now, so the risk of death is much less. And we are using masks and washing our hands more. So it's gone from a chaotic problem when it first hit to a complex problem. So we don't quite know when we're going to get back to normal business, but we do know that we are quite confident we are going to get back in the next year or two.
Yes, very clear. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
One more question, and excuse me for that. I am new for the Agile environment, and just trying to figure out what we are currently doing. Using this framework, are we going to change what is in complex to be complicated or to be simple using this framework, or what should we use this framework for?
Right. So what we use this framework for is to make a decision about whether we're going to run a project using waterfall or agile.
In Agile, yeah, not waterfall.
Yep. So where it's clear, just use waterfall.
Okay, John, I have a question here, please. Is there a tool or a document? Can I use it to kind of find a framework to help me, or how I can use it?
Sorry, what do you mean? Like a software tool?
Not software, maybe template, maybe a method to implement something like that. You know, Agile, we have Agile board, for example. We can put the sprint over the board.
Yeah.
Okay, something like that.
Yeah.
Is there a yeah?
Yes, I'll be talking about that in about 15-20 minutes. I'll be talking about that type of tool. But this Cynefin framework is what it's trying to do. It's trying to get us, or it's helping us to articulate and deal with increasing levels of complexity in our world. Because we know, and I'm going to show you that we know that when we are dealing with trying to change systems in the complex domain, then we really need to use Agile. It's better. And so this is a tool which IT departments can use to go to the business to go, this type of problem that we're doing at the moment fits in the complex domain. We should be going Agile for this. Whereas this particular problem is complicated. We can do most of that with waterfall, but we want to do some Agile experiments just to clarify things. This particular problem is very clear or very simple. Waterfall, no problem. Just do it. And this problem over here, which is chaotic, we just have to act right now. And so this is a tool that senior, like CTOs, IT managers would use to justify and argue for deploying Agile in certain areas or certain projects, or for going waterfall for certain areas for certain projects. So it's a tool to help IT strategy and business strategy. It's a framework. And this is an introduction, remember. This would normally be, you know, a one-day class. We go through this with examples and we get people working out. But I wanted to, you know, this is an introduction to Agile. And if you click that link, you can go to a website with lots and lots and lots and lots of articles on it. But I warn you, it is quite difficult. It takes a while to get in there. But what I really want to do is not to get you proficient with this tool, but I want you to start to think about, are your systems complicated, simple, or complex? And once you start to get better at identifying the difference between complex and complicated and simple or clear, the better decisions you're going to be the better strategy decisions you're going to make about implementing Agile or not implementing Agile.
John, we have two questions, maybe related to each other.
Sure.
First one, what is legacy system?
What is what?
Legacy system.
A legacy system is an old system. So a legacy system, for example, might be the ERP system. Let's just say you bought a company and you're running SAP, and the company that you bought is running an old version of Siebel. So, but you're not going to migrate all of your users off Siebel because it's just too much. So you might integrate with them. Now, Siebel would be the legacy system. It's the old system. It's the system that's been around for a long time.
Okay, second question, is it still some companies use waterfall to deliver their application or not? However, we have Agile with this advanced framework.
So if it is a clear or a complicated problem that they're trying to solve, then waterfall is fine. No problem. It's good. But when the requirements are unclear and the technology is new and unfamiliar, then that's when you want to use Agile.
Excuse me, John. I'd like
Yes.
to ask a question related to IT industry. I'm coming from the background of ERP implementation and digital transformation. Let's put it in a practice. If I am going to implement SAP with the best practice, exactly without any modification or customization beside the configuration side, will this consider as an Agile or as waterflow? I don't have complexity. It is a well-defined domain, for example, finance or HR for a specific in a country. So what we consider this?
Okay, so you use the word best practice, which means that you believe that it's a very simple problem to solve. So your business that you're going to be putting it in, let's say finance, is very similar to lots of other SAP case studies, and that you can implement that software and turn the key and everyone's going to be happy, then that is a waterfall type of problem. It's very straightforward. Now, where it becomes more complex is if your business case is different to the architectures that are being offered to you by the provider, by SAP, or to the configurations. So if your business is a little bit different, then it might be complicated. But if it's very different, then it becomes adaptive. So, if it's just putting in a general ledger, and it's a similar general ledger to lots of other businesses, then that is straightforward, waterfall, clear problem.
Right. In the industry of IT, we are familiar with the concept of center of excellence.
Yep.
The center of excellence is a mirror of agile concept. Do you agree with me, or am I wrong?
An error, did you say?
No, the center of excellence. When you build the center of excellence for SAP or Microsoft or any other digital environment, I think we must follow not waterflow, because you're going to adapt any changes. You're going to modify the system to suit the changes that's going on internally. And that team is combined of change management and then business procedures and also the IT as well. So this type of communication and the center of excellence and the flow of the introducing the modification represent the agile.
Not necessarily. It can do both. So let's just say, let's imagine that we've got a center of excellence with skilled people that can implement a wide variety of solutions with the technologies that they're skilled in. Now, sometimes a business owner might come to them and say, this is my requirement. And if that requirement is very clear and very straightforward, then that team doesn't need to use Agile. They can just use a waterfall process. It's like a template. They just roll it out. And your center of excellence should be able to determine whether that problem is clear or whether it's complicated or whether it's complex. So if the business comes to them and it's not clear, but it's complicated, but the requirements are clear, but they might need some external expertise. They might need to contract a data engineer or something like that. Then that can still be done waterfall. But when the requirements are unknown, when the requirements are moving all of the time, when the business is changing and flexing, then that's when you want to use Agile techniques. So the center of excellence are a group of people that should be able to work out what project method to use for any type of problem. And so even within the complex domain, even in the Agile domain, they should be able to determine whether a particular application suits a framework like Scrum, or whether it is much more of a continuous adaptation process like DevOps, and they use a Kanban type of process, or it might be that they need to, it's a very business critical, very fast response. So they might want to use extreme programming, or they might want to use mob programming in order to really, really push something out very quickly. And so it's not so much the people, it's what methods that they use to deliver products and solutions to the business. And this framework can help them choose which way to go. Does that make sense?
Thank you so much. Loud and clear.
Good, thank you. It's very difficult to do this without seeing your faces and things. It's much easier in a classroom. So I thank you for your patience.
Well. Okay. I still have some questions, but I will leave it others if possible at the end.
Okay, no problem. So what I'll do now is I'll move on. So this was, and yeah, we'll keep going. We'll keep going. So now I want to talk about some data, some statistics. And so this was done by a report by the Standish Group, and they looked at 10,000 projects, and they were looking at, was the project waterfall or was it agile? Was it successful? Did it fail? Or was it challenged? And I'll explain these things in a minute. And they looked at small projects and medium projects and large projects. So one of the first things that I kind of want to focus you on is this concept of challenged. So this is a project which successful is meant that it, you know, they rolled it out and the ERP system came up and it worked. A project which failed was that they tried to roll it out and they couldn't get it working, the data didn't integrate, the reports didn't work, so it's failed. But there's another dimension when the IT engineers delivered the system and it worked according to their requirements, but the customers weren't satisfied with the outcome. Now, why would this be? And mostly this is because business owners and customers are very, very poor at articulating their requirements. It's just not a skill set which business people are taught. It's a skill set which business analysts are taught, but in order to try to get tight requirements out of customers is very difficult, partly because they change their minds. And this is not a flaw, it's that the business is changing. So they might ask for some business intelligence reports that they asked the IT department to put together. And when those reports are finally come together in 6 months' time, everything's changed and those reports aren't important anymore. So this challenge dimension is a real problem because we see that even it doesn't matter if the project was agile or waterfall, or whether it was small, or whether it was large, or whether it was medium, most projects were challenged. So most. And this is because of this complication and complexity which is built into, which is part of IT projects, particularly along the requirements dimension. And so I think this is just something to be very aware of, is that Agile is not, it can help improve the customer satisfaction, but it's not a given. You know, Agile teams must involve the customers for this to happen very, very, very closely. And a lot of the Agile coaching I do, they are running Scrum or they're running Kanban, but they're not talking to the end customers at all. They're not engaging. And I would tell them that they're not doing Agile. So one of the other things that it tells us is that Agile's got across the board, it's got about 4 times the success rate of waterfall. But if you look at it, it's most of the difference is in large size projects. So with large size projects, 18% of Agile projects were successful, and only 3% of large waterfall projects were successful. And this is typically because with large projects take a long time, and in that time, lots of things change. So the business requirements change. People who actually wrote the requirements or dictated the requirements for a system have left the business. And so this is why things fail. And so it's with the larger projects where we want to move more into Agile, because larger projects inherently have got more uncertainty, have got more complexity built into them. The small projects, not a big amount of difference. Medium-sized projects, again, Agile's better. So this was it's a few years ago now, 2015, and they've got a new report out, which it costs about $1,000 to buy. So I haven't bought it, but I saw a summary, and it's very similar. You know, there's very similar results. So that I think is important information, and you know, the Agile community is guilty of hyping Agile too much. You know, the Agile projects still fail. Agile customers are still challenged. But it does tell us that certainly with large and medium-sized projects, we do increase the probability of success by running them through Agile methods. And 10,000 projects is enough data for us to make a business case, you know, to go Agile or not. But to me, the biggest business case is to really get close to your business users and to try to reduce that challenge column, whether it's in waterfall or Agile. If we don't really understand the requirements as developers, we are going to deliver solutions which our customers do not like. Okay, so now, sorry, back on that one. Any questions on that one? No. All right. So I'm going to introduce you to, you look for a model now. Now, this is a very old model. It comes from 1994, and it came out of the dynamic systems development method, which, if you remember from last week, was one of the precursors to the Agile Manifesto. So it came around the same time as Scrum, and this was a different method. And they produced this quite a handy tool to assess whether a project was better for waterfall or better for Agile or better as a hybrid model. So instead of saying waterfall, they call it predictive. So if you see in the middle, the middle of the radar is Agile, the second ring is hybrid, and the last ring is what they call predictive, but we pretty much call that waterfall nowadays. And they said that we can see if a project suits Agile or hybrid or waterfall, depending upon the nature of the project.
Excuse me, John.
Yes.
What is hybrid methodology?
Hybrid. So
Yes.
hybrid means a bit of waterfall and a bit of Agile.
Or you can say mix between Agile and waterfall in same scenario?
Mixed, yep, mixed.
Okay.
Mixed. We're going to have to, Hisham, we're going to have to do an Arabic translation to all of this one day as a side project, I think. I think it'd be very good. Okay. So let's see what this means. So the first question, and someone brought it up, was about culture. And so the first thing we want to ask is do we have a supportive culture of whatever method we're going to use? So are we getting buy-in from the business people? And do they trust the team? Does the business trust the team to deliver via Agile or waterfall? And most importantly, can the team make their own decisions? Because if the team can't make decisions themselves, then it doesn't suit Agile at all. So one of the key components of Agile is to give the teams a lot of autonomy about how they develop the solution and how they build it. If the culture doesn't support that autonomous decision making, then it's going to lean towards a waterfall type of approach. So the next thing was the team. So how big is the team? Because agile teams are much suited to a small team, 2 or 4 or 6 or 12 people, much more than about a dozen people. It starts to become very difficult to become autonomous and to run agile type of methods. So if you've got a very large team of 100 engineers, then that's going to be, you either break it into 10 teams of 10 engineers if you can, or if you can't for whatever reason, then that's going to suit waterfall. Then you have to ask about the experience of the team. Does the team have the experience to run the project? And in agile teams, we tend to look for the experience changes a bit. So you tend to have a little fewer more generalists. So someone might be able to code in SAP and Java. I mean, I don't know, but you might be able to have a multi or T-shaped skills, they call them. But most importantly is that the team has got all the skills necessary in order to build a solution. So if you're building an app, you'd have database people on the team, you'd have user interface people on the team, you'd have security people on the team, and then the team would do their own testing as well. So you wouldn't necessarily have an individual tester. So is the team experienced in building things themselves is a question we have to ask. And if they're highly specialized and they're not used to collaborating together, then it's also going to favor hybrid or waterfall type of projects. Access means do the teams have access to the business owners? Can they get the product owners and the business owners in the room very quickly? So with Agile, one of the first things that we do when we're creating Agile teams out of in organizations which have traditionally run waterfall is that we make sure that the product owners and the Agile teams are talking almost on a daily basis. And if you can't get access to the product owners and the business owners in order to keep clarifying and testing ideas, then once again, that's going to gravitate towards a waterfall type of environment. And lastly, is what's the nature of the project? Are there going to be lots of changes? If there's going to be lots of changes in the project, if the requirements are going to change, and there's going to be, if there's during a merger and acquisition, then that favors Agile. If there's not going to be a lot of changes, then waterfall would be fine for that. And then, so how critical is the project? So, if the project goes, is it how business critical is it? Now, this is a problematic dimension because, sometimes Agile will be better for critical projects. Sometimes waterfall will be better for critical projects. So that's quite a difficult category to talk about, but it's something we have to consider. And the delivery is, can we deliver the solution in increments? So if we can deliver, one feature every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, then that's going to suit Agile. But if the nature of the project means that we have to deliver the solution as one deliverable, one great big monolithic project, then that's going to be more waterfall. And then there's a series of questions that comes with that, and you can link to the question. Now, I think that you may have to be join Agile Alliance. It's a fairly cheap membership in order to get access to that one. I can't remember. It may be a subscription-based questionnaire, but on that arrow, when you get your PDFs, then you can go to this questionnaire and see what the questions are and create your own radar charts. And so here is an example of what it might look like. So a highly agile project is where, when you answer those questions, is that clusters towards, you know, an agile type of project, whereas the one on the right, you know, it's a lot of the things are waterfall, but there are some things which suit agile. So we can do some, we might be able to do some prototyping in agile, or we might be able to run some meetings or some of the development in agile type of ways. And so the important thing there is it doesn't have to be all agile or waterfall in organizations. Agile has got a very important place, but you don't throw away all of your waterfall or your predictive skills and tools. You use agile where it makes sense to make agile, and you use waterfall where it makes sense to do waterfall, and you can combine the approaches. You can do a bit of both, and that's the key thing to take away from that slide. So that's really the end of the theory, because it's pretty dense. And so what I'm really trying to say here is that when you're looking at a project, first of all, consider what the technical uncertainty is. Do you understand the technology? Is the technology changing? Is it simple, and do you have the skills? Is there certainty around the technical layer? What about the requirements? Are the requirements really solid? Are they really well understood, not only by the developers, but by the business people? Have they been clear? Do you think the business people actually understand the requirements? Because often they don't. Then the next one is consider the predictability of the outcome. So if it's you know, you think that you can predict the outcome of a project simply, then just roll out waterfall. If you think you can predict it with a fairly high degree of certainty, but it's going to take a bit of work and take some analysis, then that's possibly also a waterfall project with some agile bits. But if you really can't predict what the end solution is going to look like, because the requirements and the technology and everything's changing and the skill sets, then you should be using agile methods to deploy that. Really consider the customer's definition of satisfaction. You know, if there's one thing to take away from today's talk, is to get closer to your business users, get closer to your business customers, and understand what their level of satisfaction is. Because it really doesn't matter whether you use waterfall or agile. To get there, what you're really trying to do is you're trying to get a very satisfied user who can do something with the tools that you're developing. And you have to understand what the value is, what their value of those tools are. Because if they don't get value out of it, then it's going to be challenged. It's going to be a bit of a waste of all that effort. And finally, when you're considering which way to go, whether to go agile or waterfall or a bit of both, consider the culture of the organization, consider how the team is made up, and consider the type of project. You know, can the project be broken into pieces, or can it only really be delivered in a linear serial technique? And with those tools, as you get more familiar with them, you should be able to work out which projects are better for agile and which projects are more suited for waterfall, and which are best to combine. So with that, I'll open it to questions.
Okay, thank you, John, for this great session. Okay, Hussam, you told us you have many questions. If you can start, please.
So much for
okay.
the time. I have only 2 questions only left. It was very rich, full session. First thing is there is a myth saying that Agile sometimes is a hole where you can drag yourself into, assuming that, okay, I will start implementing one piece at the time of my enterprises. And the time, by the time you focus in one area and then you move to the next area, you extend the time. So how we can solve this issue when I want to really start piece by piece in my organization as an agile, but at the same time, I hope this is not going to extend the time for the time that also conflict more issues and changes also in my organizations. So how I can balance that?
Yeah, so assuming that we're doing Agile in the complex domain, then a rough rule of thumb means that you usually get a happy, satisfied customer about 30% quicker than waterfall, if it's in that complicated domain, in the complex domain. If it's a simple solution or even a complicated solution, it doesn't make any difference. But Agile, when it's done well, it's very quick. You are getting features in front of the customers very, very, very quickly. It's very disciplined. Now, this myth, as you said, that it becomes continuous, that's probably the business wanting more and more and more. Now, one of the things that we have to get to in terms of being able to prioritize what we're going to develop is also a discipline. So what is the portfolio of initiatives that we're working on and what are the most important? But how can I say this? Part of that myth that Agile keeps dragging on is because people probably haven't seen disciplined Agile teams. A really disciplined Agile team is highly productive. That they get a lot of work done very, very quickly. And if they're not, then they're either not disciplined in Agile, they're confusing the methods, or the individuals just haven't quite got the skills to work together. But mostly when we look at waterfall, and I've been doing this for nearly 20 years now, if you get a waterfall team and an Agile team with the same type of complicated problem, then the Agile team will beat the waterfall team. The waterfall team might take 6 months, and the Agile team will have happy customers in 4 months. It's that much of a difference.
Very clear, sir. The last thing I want to ask is why exactly the Agile is trying, from what I understand, avoid so much documentation, and the word of documentation is exercised and seeded in every enterprises now, and it's like based on a standards they have to follow that. And why the Agile is trying to avoid that side and add value into the documentation part, start using the project as Agile. And thank you so much, sir.
That's okay. So one of the ideas is not to avoid documentation, but what you want to do is with Agile delivery, you want to get you want to get working code or working solutions in front of the user as quickly as possible. And so to do that, it means that out of so many hours you have in the day, it's less time that you want to spend documenting, and more time you want to do is testing the code and getting the code in front of the user. Now, the reason that we want to spend less time documenting is because we're working in a team. We don't have to pass our code from person to person to person. But it is a grave mistake to say we don't need any documentation at all, because we do. And good teams will be very disciplined about using controlled vocabularies, about doing inline documentation, about using standard factors and standard variables, and being very disciplined about that. But there just may be less words. But if you're encountering teams that are avoiding documentation altogether, then they are doing it dead wrong, because you have to have code which is understandable for people, 2 years, who are going to inherit your systems 2 years down the track. If they don't understand the variables, if they don't understand some of your coding decisions, then you are creating a massive technical debt, and it's a real problem. So Agile will spend more time trying to get the working code, but you do need to have some documentation, but it's not fat documentation.
Let's say, so we can start with Agile to give the look and feel and real achievements, and work on the documentation later on, where there is no pressure, as you said, for archiving and for future support and looking. I think the balance goes like this. We can go Agile in delivery, and then after delivery, we can enhance our documentation. Or do you still think this is not good exercise? Thank you so much, sir.
So the important thing is to make sure the document is necessary, is to ask yourself, what is the documentation for? So number one. So in Waterfall, we documented heavily so that a tester could understand where a bug could be. So one of the things that we want to do is we want to, in Agile, we reduce the amount of testing we do by using a technique called test-driven delivery. And with test-driven delivery, one of the things that teams would do is say, look, let's create some code that will test the solution. So let's just say we're creating a sign-on. So we say our test will be that a user can sign on to 3 different systems with 1 click. Now, before they show that solution, they test it. So they're testing every day. They're testing and saying, right, we've now tested it. We've now got some code which automatically tests our solution. We can now demonstrate it to the business. So we don't need documentation to show a tester anymore, because we've already tested it. But what we do need is to say, well, okay, this is the software version that we used. These are the variables. These are the data sets that our code accesses, and that needs to be packaged, because someone needs to be able to work with it. And so unless, in Agile, we have a thing called a backlog, and we make sure these backlogs are done. And one of the items on that backlog should be sufficient documentation. Now, it's up to the team and up to the business to decide what the sufficient documentation is, but you need to do it. It's part of the discipline.
Okay, thank you, John. We have another couple of questions. They become 3. Okay, I need to know how long time we have for question to know to.
Up to you.
Okay, great. We have a question now. What's the difference between hybrid and agile?
Okay, so for example, we might have a waterfall project. We might decide that we're going to use a standard waterfall technique to deliver the project, but we need to clarify some requirements. Now, what we might do is we might use some agile programming in order to run some tests, some experiments to put in front of the users, some prototyping. And so we might use agile to do some prototyping, and they say, look, we're happy with that look and feel, and there's no database underneath it, for example, it's just using dummy code. And we've used agile in order to get the interfaces right. And once we're happy with the interfaces, then we say, rightio, now we'll give that to the development team, and then they're going to integrate all the different data, and they're going to put it in the systems. They're going to get the security and all those other type of things. So that's what we've done, is we've used some agile in order to clarify requirements, but we've used waterfall to put it into the release. Does that make sense?
Yes, sure. Thank you. Other question is, what are the main roles should be there in the Agile team? And what's the difference between project team and product team? I think this same question I asked in the before start our session. So maybe I don't know if you can answer now or it should be discussed in the next session, but we need to know what's the difference between the roles inside the Agile team.
So number one, there is no defined roles in Agile, right? So the Agile Manifesto does not mention anything to do with roles. So in terms of Agile, roles, they're meaningless. Now, in some Agile practices, so for example, Scrum is one Agile practice, and it has got tightly defined roles. So it'll have a Scrum Master, it's got a product owner, it's got developers. Now, in Scrum, they say a product owner is the person that's in charge of the backlog. So here is our feature backlog, and the product owner is the person who is responsible for ordering that one. So we're going to put this feature above this feature. That's the job of the product owner, and the idea of the product owner is that he or she understands the business enough to make that decision. The job of a Scrum Master is to remove obstacles and to facilitate meetings and to really be a servant for the other developers. When you are creating your Agile teams, you need to think about, do you want your teams to be modeled on Scrum? Do you want to create a hybrid Agile team? Is it a Kanban type of thing? And you need to think about how work is going to flow through that team and what type of roles that you may need. But what I'm trying to say is that Agile doesn't prescribe roles. There are some Agile methods which suggest roles, but every organization can make up their own roles. It's the important thing is to understand what is it you're really trying to achieve. The team has got to understand the business requirements. So you need a way to get the business requirements to the team. The team has got to be able to work together in order to write the software or to put together the solutions. And everything else has got to happen. If you're an ERP, there's got to be compliance, there's got to be security. So all of these jobs that are going to be done by the team, you have to make sure that there's someone doing it, whether they have a particular title or not. But try not to get too worried about what's the job of a product manager or what's the job of a Scrum Master. They are handy when you're getting going, when you're first starting, but as you become more agile, the idea of roles starts to dissolve because every project's so different. As long as you have, as long as you have the elements of the work managed by the team and by the people in those teams. Some Scrum teams don't have any Scrum Masters, they don't have any facilitators, they don't have any product owners. They just say we're the team, and they all swap roles, and they do it very, very well.
Okay, thank you. Second question, who do or what you mean when you say individuals in agility?
I'm not too sure if could we ask the question in a different way? What individuals? What do you mean?
Can you ask a question with another way? 1 second.
Okay, can I ask my question? Or...
Sure.
Okay. Last week we talked about, or our mentors talk about 4 principles, 4 values, and 12 principles.
Yeah.
Now, we are talking about many techniques about agility.
Yes.
Okay. And we go to details about Scrum.
Yes.
Is it possible to be a Scrum Master without an agility umbrella, or I have to cover all agility umbrella and then go to master as a Scrum Master?
So a Scrum Master is a facilitator. Is that another word for them is a team facilitator. The more they understand about Agile as a whole, the better it is. But the question is no. I could take someone who has got never heard of Agile, and they're going to start into a Scrum team on Sunday, and I could train them on Thursday and give them some reading, and they would know how to become that. They would know how to be a Scrum Master. The theory of it, they would know what to do on Sunday. It's one day plus some reading. But what they're not going to understand is why they're there, what they're trying to do. That they'll understand how to facilitate a team and how to run the Scrum meetings and the Scrum ceremonies, but they won't necessarily understand the broader picture of Agile. So what's a metaphor? So I could train, we could train a nurse just to do a little bit, just to give pills. But a better nurse, we'd also teach that nurse how to do resuscitation and how to do some diagnosis. So we can train people in the elements like a Scrum Master, but the more people learn this, the more they can understand the bigger picture and the better they will be. Does that help you?
Okay, I can get a little bit from your explanation, but the idea, I want to get a good clarification, because I got an Agile coaching course.
Yes.
Agile coaching course, I think it's focused on mindset processes.
Sure.
And the agility now, it's talking about systems. How I channeling this to get a good idea about agility?
So the coaching course is, it's a good way, and they will talk about the attitudes. But what's your role at the moment? What do you do at the moment in terms of IT, and what's your job title?
I'm actually retired now.
Retired?
But I am a consultant.
Okay.
IT consultant.
Yeah. So for you, you probably want to get a very conceptual type of understanding of it, rather than a nitty-gritty understanding of it. The how can I look? How can I explain this? When you are hands-on and doing things, if you're a developer and I threw you into a development team on Sunday, and that development team was running in an agile way, within a week or two, you would know so much about agile if they were doing it very well, because in some ways agile is very intuitive. But to read about agile from not having seen it and not having experienced it and worked with it, it's much more difficult, because you're trying to relate fairly abstract concepts to the work group. But I think, how do I say, where do we go? I think the reading, if you head off to the Agile Alliance, the website Agile Alliance, and they've got lots and lots of different blog articles and lots of videos, and that can give a very broad understanding of what Agile does. It's very large. They've got lots and lots of practices. I'm sorry, I can't. It's very difficult for me to answer the question, because it's in some ways Agile is quite simple, but in other ways it's very, very deep and very philosophical.
Okay.
But ultimately, what it is, it's a way to organize work. It's a way to organize work in a dynamic environment, and yeah. I'm a bit of a loss of which way to advise you, but I think the Agile Alliance website is possibly the best, because they're the ones who hold the Agile banner.
Okay. Thank you for this help. Could you write the website on the chat area? Okay.
Yep.
And why I am asked these questions, because of what's PMI trying to make agility and new version exams of them, their syllabus. But I want to consider for that issue or version of exams. No more. I'm not interested to get all agility details.
Right. Okay. Again, so you'll find, and what you'll find also, sir, is that there is the Agile Alliance are the original keepers of it. There's a lot of people that are trying to just make money off the Agile banner, and that they are going to try to spin it or whatnot. So there's a lot of false prophets out there. Try to steer your learning to the core people, some of the founders of it who are still around and who are still writing and still developing, and try to understand some of the deeper thinking which has gone into the Agile community.
Okay, John, thank you very much for your time and your great session. Thank you everybody for joining us. We are look forward for our next session next week. Okay.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you for you.
Very informative. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank
So it's
you.
a very difficult one this week. Next week will be much easier.
Oh,
Okay,
it's
Sure.
very
thank
easy.
you.
Thank you, John.
Okay,
Good
thank you.
news.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Bye bye.
Bye bye.